I did some work yesterday in my garage. It's a little hoarderish in my garage. It's a lot, my kids would say it's a lot hoarderish in my garage. But it's not like junk, it's good stuff, and I'm going to use all of it someday, but I don't know when to get rid of things sometimes and when not to. And maybe you've got a garage like that. Maybe you've got what I call the garage of good intentions. Anybody else got a garage of good intentions? Look at you guys not wanting to admit it. You know you do, some of you. Some of you have the perfect garage. I'm very jealous when I drive by and people leave their garage doors open. I'm like, show-offs. Because I try to hide mine as quick as possible because I just got so much stuff everywhere, packed to the rafters, that I swear this stuff I'm going to use someday. It's going to come in really handy. Maybe you've got a treadmill that's become a clothes rack. Maybe you've got a vintage record player that you're going to fix up someday. You're going to find out where transistors come from. Maybe you've got a box of memories that you can't give up on, all those high school trophies. Maybe you have this little museum. I have a museum I'm building out. I've got some contacts in the vintage computer community that I have that have started a home computer museum. And I think really what it was is it started like me just collecting a bunch of junk. And they just were like, we should turn this into a museum. So maybe I'll do a museum because I've got a whole collection of really old electronics, most of them not functioning, that I'm going to fix someday when I get some time. This is where I'm at with, it's bad. It's cheaper stuff than like cars. So I'm glad I'm not a car guy. But it's you can't drive these either. So they're just unusable things I've got in my garage. But I think all of us from time to time, no matter what your hobby is, we collect things that are completely unusable, and we are just certain that someday it's going to come in handy. Someday, and then we're going to, finally be vindicated, like the kid in Christmas Story, where he was so happy that his parents, he knew someday that they would be sad for all the things that he got in trouble about, right? And that soap in his mouth, they would know because he became blind. I know someday I'm going to have the perfect part in my garage, and I'm going to be like, yes, this was what I've been waiting for. That's why I held on to all this stuff for this long. But it's tough to know, right? It's tough to know what to throw away. It's tough to know what to keep. And today we're going to talk about this kind of in this context of what do we keep and what do we throw away. And there's this parable that Jesus teaches about the stuff that's kept and the stuff that's thrown away. And it's kind of a challenging, like I mentioned last week, it's one of the tougher parables because it is very challenging to us as we read it. What is this about? Who is it addressing? Different scholars on different reads of this have said it's exactly about this or it's exactly about that. But there is, as Jesus explains it even, this is one of the parables he explains, there is a little bit of freedom there within the lines to think about this critically and be logical with the nature of God to think about what is he talking about here. Now, I think this statement is pretty obvious, right? Just because you hoard a bunch of tools, it doesn't make you a handyman. I could have said any number of things here. This is not my problem. And so I'm picking on those of you that have way too many tools and way too many expensive tools because it's easier to pick on you than it is to pick on me. If I were to say me, I would probably say just collecting a bunch of computers doesn't make you a computer repairman. For some people, you buy books and you have no intention of ever reading those books. You just have books all over the place and it makes you look smart because you have a big library, right? Some of us, we buy things and we have them and we store them, but it doesn't really, until they're used, do what the end goal of that product or that item is. What I hope to do today, in our few minutes together, is to motivate you to move beyond mere proximity to Jesus Christ, to move beyond mere proximity to serious, sincere connection. There is a difference between connection to Christ and proximity to Christ. There's a big difference in that. And I want to talk about that because it's just like this idea, we can know a lot about something or we can have passion and let that fuel our activity and our action. Just like we keep things in the garage, hoping that someday they'll be necessary, we might do the same thing with our spiritual life. We hoard a lot of information, we know a lot of stuff, we even get in proximity to Jesus and his works and his people and his church, but we are not legitimately connected. And that is really one of the biggest teachings, I believe, out of this story, that we store up good intentions and don't live the life of purpose. So if we think about farming, I know not many of us are farmers, but I grew up in a very agricultural community in Oklahoma. grew up around all of these things, grew up being a part of agriculture, raised animals, raised hogs, and showed those hogs. And so I was a part of that. I was a part of water conservation and wrote essays on that and delivered speeches on that. So a lot of those things aren't completely foreign to me, but now raising wheat is pretty foreign to me, right? I'm not doing that. I haven't done that with my life. But as I look around and think about this idea of the planting of these seeds that become wheat, that give life, I think there are some connections between what Jesus teaches here for us today. Because what we find is our church, where you're at right now, Coffee Creek Church, is very much like the world around us. It is a mixture. It is a mixture of people that are genuinely, passionately connected to Christ and seeking to live their life more like Him each day. And then there are people that are just along for the ride. So kind of like a couple weeks ago where we talked about the different kinds of seed and how they're scattered. There's people that are just really kind of interested. And if you look in the New Testament, when Jesus would do miracles, I mean, He would have a throng of people around Him, thousands of people following Him around because they were impressed by the spectacle, the circus of it. They were impressed by the power of it. But they weren't legitimately like with Jesus. They weren't seeking to live like Him. They were interested, but they had not made the move to transformation. So you might say they were close proximity to Jesus, but they were not connected to Jesus. And this is why, first sign of trouble, many of them scattered, right? So there's a difference between just being along for the ride and being genuinely connected and seeking to be closer to Christ. And this can be confusing for us because it's very human for us to look at others more harshly than ourselves, right? And we look at others and we judge them and say, well, you're the bad one and I'm the good one. We do that. And we have to be very careful with not to do that because specifically we're told that's not our job. There's a time when separation comes, but that time is not now. And so it is right and proper and good that we are a mixture of people just like the entire world is. And some people will be with us for a time period, and some people will become less interested and walk away from that. And that is just the story of history and the story of humanity and the way that this broken world operates. And that's to be expected. We must expect that that is a part of what this looks like. And Jesus tells this story of wheat to really bring that out. The wheat and the weeds, or the wheat and the tares in older Bibles, it's kind of highlighted there. So we're going to look in Matthew today, chapter 13. And as we look at this story, one thing I do want to draw a corollary to at least is I don't want you to, and I just put that kind of disclaimer on there that it's not for us to separate. It's not for you to look around and go, yeah, that's a wheat, yeah, that's a weed, right? I don't want any of that because what I ultimately want us to be able to do is to be introspective enough today to realize there might be a little wheat in here and a little weed in here. There might be both. There might be tare in here and wheat. There might be good and bad. And what I might need to do is try to lean into being transformed by connection to Christ instead of just being proximity, because that might lean me the other way out of this. And so what I hope to do is to show that there's a little bit in both of us, and that the refining process that happens can be through the Spirit's work in our life to lead us closer. I mean, I think all of us understand when we start to follow Jesus the first day, you're not Mother Teresa on day one. It takes a lifetime of commitment. It is the word discipleship, which is ultimately what we're going to get into today with this, because it is constant choice that either leads us closer to God or further away from Him. You'll go through phases in your life where you'll feel closer and like you're hitting on all cylinders. And it's not, your spiritual health is not much different than your physical health, right? There are times you go through where you're walking every day or you're working out every day, you're eating right, you feel like your health is hitting on all cylinders. And there's times when you eat the whole bucket of fudge and you feel like, you just feel like not getting out of bed. You're going to bed rot for that week, right? There's times that we go through all, that's humanity. So there's going to be times in your life when you feel really spiritually close to God, and there's going to be times when you feel less so. And what we're looking to do is not have so many highs and lows, but instead to look at how do we progress year over year, day over day, month over month, closer to becoming more like Jesus, to being transformed from the inside out. And that is what I think is key about this parable. So I'm going to read from the New Living Translation, which is my favorite one to use on Sundays here with us. Yours may have a title there, beginning in verse 24, that is like the parable of the wheat and the tares. And tares is just another word for that kind of weed growing up amongst a good crop. And it's just a little older. We don't use that. So this tends to use the weeds concept instead. So it says, here's another story Jesus told. The kingdom of heaven is like a farmer who planted good seed in his field. But that night, as the workers slept, his enemy came and planted weeds among the wheat and then slipped away. And when the crop began to grow and produce grain, the weeds also grew. The farmer's workers went to him and said, "Sir, the field where you planted that good seed is full of weeds. Where did they come from?" "An enemy has done this," the farmer exclaimed. "Should we pull out the weeds?" they asked. Now, these are the workers wanting to know, should we try to get rid of all these weeds? Which, I mean, in a large field would seem like insanely impossible, wouldn't it? And so he says, no. Verse 29, no, you'll uproot the wheat if you do. So you've probably seen this concept before. You get some weeds in your flower bed and you start to weed it. You have to be careful because weeds have those roots that go deep sometimes and wrap around other plants, and you'll pull out both things at once. And he said, I don't want to do that, so don't do that because you'll pull out both. He said, let both, verse 30, let both grow together until the harvest. And then I will tell the harvesters to sort out the weeds, tie them into bundles, and burn them, and put the wheat in the barn. So there's a time coming for the final removal of evil. It's not today. And so it is this unique mix of good and evil. I was reading an author this week that was talking about this concept, and I think I've got a quote here in a minute that I'll share with you about from a CC. But this concept that we are forever a combination of good and bad. And when you start to follow Jesus, it is like you've become a new creation in Christ, but it is also like you are the old self too. It's good that you have a renewed vision of life. It's good to have hope. All those things are good, but you carry your faults with you. They don't instantly disappear. And I think that's the magic thinking sometimes we have to be careful about, is to realize we are still sinners in a broken world. We are apt to fail. Perfection is not what comes into this life in this world as a result of following Jesus. Jesus is perfect, but we are not. And we are apt to slip up. And so that's I think a really tough thing to really wrap our mind around, is to understand we carry our faults with us. But that is part of the process of seeking to move away from those failures and faults and to move closer to Jesus, how he sees the world, how he treats others. And so Jesus then, if we skip down to verse 36, this is where my version at least says, parable of the wheat and weeds explained. And so Jesus here explains this. It says, then leaving the crowds outside, Jesus went into the house, and his disciples said, please explain to us the story of the weeds in the field. Now, we don't always get this. We don't always get explicit explanations. So here's what Jesus says to them. The Son of Man is the farmer who plants the good seed. Son of Man is Jesus. It's a title that he frequently used for himself. And so Son of God, Son of Man, those are interchangeable titles for Jesus. And so this is one that he uses for himself. The Son of Man is the farmer. So he's saying he's the farmer who plants good seed. The field is the world, and the good seed represents the people of the kingdom. The weeds are the people who belong to the evil one. The enemy who planted the weeds among the wheat is the devil. The harvest is the end of the world, and the harvesters are the angels. Just as the weeds are sorted out and burned in the fire, so it will be at the end of the world. The Son of Man will send his angels, and they will remove from his kingdom everything that causes sin and all who do evil. And the angels will throw them into the fiery furnace, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And then the righteous will shine like the sun in their Father's kingdom. Anyone with ears to hear should listen and understand. Anyone with ears to hear should listen and understand. Now that's interesting. And Jesus' use of that phrasing is very interesting to me, because we all have ears. Like, what's he talking about there? Is he getting to the deeper message that he wants people to really hear and to really understand as a result of that? This concept of wheat, of good in the world, and the concept of bad in the world. And the really revolutionary thing for his hearers, at least, was to hear about a time coming at the complete end of evil, when evil would be put to rest. And this is the purpose of the Messiah. Now, they were expecting him to come in with an army and take over Rome. This is just what all people expected of the Messiah that was prophesied about. They expected him to march in as like a King David kind of ruler, and to take over. And he was saying that's not how that's going to happen. It's going to happen much slower, much differently, and in a way that you're not expecting. And that was tough for them. That was tough for them to grasp. But what we have to look at here is, Assisi said this, St. Francis, he said, can the humility and compassion exist in our words and in our eyes unless we know we too are truly capable of any act? So can we understand, can we really have compassion unless we understand that we too are capable of great evil? And I think that's, unfortunately, sometimes we get off track and we think of others as bad and us as good, and we get into the them versus us kind of conversations, and we forget that we too are capable, and I would say even lean towards often evil deeds, especially if we're off track. Martin Luther said it this way. He said, simul justus el peccator, which is this idea of we are all a mixture of saint and sinner. Luther said we are all some sort of combination. We're all on the spectrum, basically, of saint and sinner. There's no one that's pure saint. There's no one that's pure sinner. We're all kind of this mix. And he said until we recognize that, we will tend to put people in camps. We'll tend to draw circles. These are the good people. These are the bad people. And that's not helpful at all to the kingdom of God. That is not useful. We are combinations. And our choices every day, our choices are leading us more towards becoming like wheat or more towards getting in the weeds. And we get a choice of that. Like the only way you're excluded from the kingdom of God is if you choose to be excluded from the kingdom of God, because you're an automatic winner. You're automatically included in the kingdom of God. You are welcome to this, but you can self-exclude. You can push yourself out if you want to be on that other way. And the interesting thing is that we see this in the life of Judas. We see one of Jesus' most closest disciples, and commonly we give him an out. We're like, well, he was bad, but the thing is he was choosing not just at that one, it wasn't just like a temporary, like one choice where he was like giving up Jesus. He chose to be an embezzler from the beginning. He was following Jesus for the wrong reasons from the beginning. And he continued to make choices that led him further away from being a disciple of Jesus. He was just in proximity. As you read in John chapter 12, it's interesting here. Judas, this disciple that would soon betray him, said that perfume was worth a year's wages. It should have been sold. So this is the time where he's getting upset about perfume being used on Jesus. But look in the yellow here. The note that John makes, not that he cared for the poor, he was a thief. And since he was in charge of the disciples' money, he often stole some for himself. The dude was bad from the beginning and making choices that led him down paths worse and worse and worse. He started off bad, but he continued to make those bad choices. It's why we are warned in the book of Romans to not copy the behavior and the customs of this world, but instead let God transform us into a new person by changing the way that we think. The weeds tend to hang on. I think of them like thorny kind of things that are hanging on and that are difficult to rid ourselves of. It's never going to be completely rid in your life. You're never going to be completely free of your faults. But as you carry them with you, your goal is to move closer and closer to be more like Jesus, closer and closer to doing good in this life, to loving the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, to loving your neighbor as yourself. These are your goals, clear as day, put in front of you. What is the antithesis of that then? Loving yourself or anything else over God, and loving yourself more than your neighbor. Idol, ego, the id. All of these things pushing us away from that. So it couldn't be any more clear in front of us. In the parable of the wheat and the tares, we see two different orientations, two different kind of, if you think of glasses, ways of seeing the world. You have two different kinds of people receiving the same invitation. They're all getting invited into the kingdom. You see people who are accepting the invitation and realizing they are kingdom citizens and are working towards looking more like that. They are coming into the kingdom. They are excited about the kingdom. Their thoughts and actions are kingdom-oriented, and they want to move away from their faults and the things that would drive them away. And then you see another type of person who is orienting themselves away from it. They could be close to Jesus. Judas was closer to Jesus than a lot of the crowds. He was in proximity. He saw the miracles. He witnessed the things Jesus was capable of. And still, even being that close, chose to go outside of the kingdom, to exclude himself. Judas was not excluded by Christ or God. He chose to walk away from that truth. This is still common in our world today. This is the choice in front of us. And you have that choice, not just today, but certainly today, but every day that you wake up. You have the choice of, will you be involved in the kingdom activities and let the nature of Christ transform you and your character, or will you remain in the world? I don't know if you've ever seen lights on a summer night like this on the back porch that all the bugs come around, right? All kinds of things are attracted to that. Bug zappers, if you ever had one of those as a kid. I had one that I could see out my window. I watched that thing every summer. Just zip, 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 zip. One year, a hummingbird got caught in it. It was awesome. I mean, horrible. Horrible, kids. Sorry. Goodness, that's awful. Edit that out. It caught on fire. It was awful. And so I remember watching that thing, falling to sleep so many nights as a kid. And the thing is with Jesus is he's this light in this world. He's this unique thing that's happening in this world. So lots of people are attracted to him. Lots of people are interested in his message. But not all are going to stick, and not all are going to say, I want to be like Jesus. I want to be a disciple of Jesus. And even some of those that say they want to be a disciple of Jesus are fooling themselves. I don't know that Judas really thought of himself as a weed, right? When he heard these parables told, when he saw these things, I think he was just thinking about himself so much. I don't think he thought, I am evil incarnate here. I don't know. I'm not in his mind. I can't tell you that. But it seems to me that he was following Jesus because he was interested in some part of it. And yet, at the end of the day, he never let himself be transformed to be like Jesus. He never saw the world the way Jesus did. His character remained where it was, stuck in his faults. You have that choice. But know that presence is not the same thing as participation. So you go to McDonald's, you don't become a hamburger. You go into a garage, you do not become a car. You go to church, you do not become a disciple of Jesus. It is a choice you still must make. Does it put you on a closer path to getting yourself around that kind of thing? Absolutely. It gets you close to a community of people that are seeking to do that. It helps you connect with God. All of those things are good. But at the end of the day, it's still a choice. And so this week, my prayer for you is that you would reflect on your relationship with God. We're told one of the clearest ways to know how this is happening is, what is the fruit coming out of my life? Well, the fruit coming out of Judas was putrid, bad, ugly, bad stuff, not good, right? Embezzlement, turning somebody over for a few silver coins, rejecting Christ. None of that was good. So what's coming out of your life? What are the words, the thoughts, the actions? What's coming out of you? That's how you can evaluate where you're at with Jesus. Are you growing in your faith? And if you're not, maybe it's time to take a step forward into discipleship. It's kind of like the people, if you were to go to a gym and take a nap, you don't expect to be a power lifter after that, right? You don't expect to have Arnold Schwarzenegger physique. It's not going to happen, right? You can't go to sleep in the gym. A week ago I prayed at the Thunder game, and I noticed that I did not heighten once I got there, that I was very short, and these guys were very big. And they came to me right before the prayer, and they said, look, you've been through this once before, I know, but you need to be aware. They're practicing on opposite ends of the gym, and they're going to cross over. Just stand very still. And so I'm on that Thunder logo by myself, holding this microphone, and it's about to start, right? And so the teams start crossing over, and very big people right in front of me, very big people right behind me. And I think of myself as a tall person. I'm like 6'3". I'm like, I'm pretty tall. And, they're 7 feet people. I'm like, hello. And so in that moment, I felt kind of like, just walking out here doesn't make me a basketball player. And so at the end of the day, whether you're a member of a gym and you don't work out, whether you have a lot of books and you don't read them, whether you have a garage like mine of good intentions and you're not using it, at the end of the day, you must put these things into practice. And that's what it's really all about. There's not much difference in life in all of these situations. If you want to move towards something, you must practice it. And choosing not to practice it is the same thing as going the other way, isn't it? Because we're constantly in motion. And so, how do you do that? Putting things into practice. Bible reading, prayer, committing to finishing out this series maybe, whatever that looks like for you. But make a commitment to becoming a closer disciple of Jesus. We have a course that's going to be available soon. I'm kind of trialing it out right now with a small group of Coffee Creekers, and it's gone well. And I'll be able to this next year take 10 of you through this at a time. And so the first one is already in the app. It's going to come up on April 26th after Easter. It'll be a one-day opportunity, 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. on that Saturday, that will go through what's called Practicing the Way. And it is a way to look at how do we disciple, how do we move through the practices of what the ancient church taught us about what it means to move closer to becoming more like Jesus. If one day is not good for you, over the summer I'll do an online version of it, then I'll do another one day in August, and then in the fall on Wednesday nights we'll do an 8-week series of it here once again. So for each of those I can take 10 of you through that. And so if you're interested in that, you want to know more about that, that'll be in the app, and you can find out more about Practicing the Way, and we'll be talking about it a lot. Discipleship is not hero worship, but intimacy with Christ, Bonhoeffer said. I think that's really what we need to land on today. Do you admire Jesus? Is he your hero, or are you seeking to become more like him? Do you want to be a true disciple of Jesus? Many know that I am a nerd. I'm a huge nerd, and I had the opportunity recently to sit down and have a conversation with one of the game developers of the Last of Us series. And some of you know about this video game. It's wildly popular. It's become a TV show now. But it was on PlayStation, so I've never played it. I don't have a PlayStation. I am an Xbox. And that's horrible, right? Because now the PlayStation people are like, what's wrong with him? But I got to have a really about an hour and a half long conversation with one of the developers of Last of Us, and it was really cool to hear about their thought process behind it and how they wanted to make something more than a video game. Because, I think about video games that I grew up with, like Pac-Man, and, you lose a game of Pac-Man, you're not brokenhearted. You're out a quarter, but you're not brokenhearted. And he was talking about how when they were doing the story structure of this game, they wanted to really get people involved in it. And so when you play as Pac-Man, you're this, there's not a lot of emotion tied up in that. But when you play for a game that's 60, 70, 100 hours long, and the character is not something on the screen you see, but it's kind of through your eyes, or you're really involved in those decisions on a regular basis, what they have done is they've moved the perspective, haven't they? They've moved the perspective from you being an observer of something happening to you being the character. And that's really what the goal was there. There's a difference between observing and participation. And he was telling me that, he didn't want to ruin it in case I played the game someday, but he was like, look, this is what we've done in our industry, is we want to put people in the driver's seat. So now you are James Bond, you are the ninja, you are the superhero, you are the active participant in the story. No longer are you just reading about someone else, or, it's so far detached. There's no such thing as a yellow little thing running around eating up dots, right? That's nonsensical. It was probably the easiest thing for them to put on the screen. And now it's a different story. Well, imagine a church that pushes people to become passionate pursuers of Christ, that pushes people beyond, not happy to leave them with where they're at, but looks to say this is the goal line. The goal line is to have a life filled with joy and peace and patience and love and kindness and goodness and faithfulness and gentleness and self-control. And that we are not satisfied until we've brought everybody along on that journey. The question before you then as we close today, and I want to pray this for you, are you ready to move from observer to participant? And not everyone is ready for that. Realize across this room, most are not ready for that at this moment, but it might be that God is speaking to you today that you are ready. We're all on different levels as to where we're ready in that. Some are just starting out. Some are halfway there, and they're going to think about this and chew on this. And some of you are ready to say, yes, today I'm observing too long. I need to be a participant. So, will you be transformed by Christ? Not just informed of who he is, but transformed from the inside out. And that begins with a simple response to God's invitation. God invites you to join his redemptive work, his reconstruction of this broken world, and the healing and restoring of the good, in serving others and in loving him, being generous and self-controlled and filled with righteousness and peace and goodness. The choice is yours.